to New Zealand in 1963 with an MSc in physical chemistry. She'd taken a course in bioecology in 1956 and learned about climate change in 1962 from her university connections. Molly is best known in Aotearoa, New Zealand, for her advocacy of consumer-centred electricity policy, having been on advisory groups from 1996 through 2015. After industry self-regulation rejected her input, and she focused on the fascinating topic of using ecology to heal the planet. I first met Molly in 2019 when she came to support We Climate hunger strikers around King Dick's statue outside Parliament. And it was the conversations that we had there with many passers-by that led to her recognition that native forest restoration is highly effective in healing both the land and its people. She's now working with urban maraes to plan and plant tiny forests to reconnect their youth with nature and to experience all its beneficial effects. Molly is an inspiring example of resilience as she works weed busting for a swamp restoration project and in a native plant nursery, something to aspire to. So thank you, Molly. Look forward to hearing it.
Thank you. I'm just trying to find my screen again. Here it is. Okay. Well, I have done a lot of work with native forest restoration in the last year and a half, and become very impressed both with the importance, but also some of the difficulties of doing it. And in reading about Miyawaki forests, which is a very particular technique, I came to believe that it is quite different from ordinary native forest restoration. Hang on a sec. I'm actually timing myself. How do I make it go? I'm still only learning how to deliver things, so forgive my inexperience. And I came to think that the Miyawaki technique was very, very different from the type of native forest restoration that I have been doing all over the Wellington region with forest and bird. Miyawaki forests, the method was pioneered in the 1970s by a Japanese botanist turned ecologist. And he tried it first on his own property, and then very soon after built forests using this technique in a couple of industrial areas and in his own university. I believe that's Yokohama. And his technique is always plant 3 saplings per square meter into soil which has been dug out and fully mixed up with straw and wood chip and other agricultural rubbish, preferably 2 or 3 kinds, and compost for nutrition. So dig out the soil and amend it. And then you plant your plants at a 3 per square meter, sometimes 4. And you want to contain, if possible, every single species in your chosen indigenous forest of nearby areas. He promoted the idea. He did this in the 1970s. And he promoted the idea throughout Southeast Asia. And then it caught on big time in India. And then 2 separate companies were set up after the turn of the century, one in the Netherlands and then more widely in Europe. And the most recent big publication is the Suji project, which has in the last 3.5 years planted Miyawaki forests in 19 countries worldwide. Now, in a little while, I'll share my screen because I have some pictures of these. I just need to find, here's the PowerPoint. And I think that I'll share my screen now, if I may. I need to share the screen, and I think it's desktop. I think I want to share the PowerPoint. Now, can other people see my screen PowerPoint? Can you see it? Robin, you're saying yes.
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. So this is I chose 2 forests in the first instance to show where and how city forests can be put. One of them is in London. Oddly enough, it's in amongst some mature trees in a big median strip with about, I think, 4-story housing right on either side. So this is very much a city forest, and there are areas in Wainuiomata that could do this. And the other one is in Lebanon. Apparently this group was very active in Lebanon. And look at them. 4 tiny forests in amongst a big bridge complex. Number 1 was just along the edges. Number 2 is a big piece in the middle. Number 3 and number 4. And I'm going to show you number 2, this one. Here's planting. And they're all the big buildings in the district. And here it is 24 months later, taller than the people who have come in to look after it. So these really illustrate the benefits and the exciting size of them. Now, I'll give you a couple more examples. The Lebanese have built a school forest. Now, unlike the Netherlands rule for building tiny forests, these people who are Suji is their group, and I have the references which I'm going to put in the chat. The Suji people are quite happy to start with a mere 28-meter squared lot. You see, these are tall these are tall school buildings. And here's the parking. And here's a tiny forest. And here it is a year later. Wow. So a third example is right here in Nelson. It was produced not by the standard technique because he didn't have the equipment to completely dig out the ground around it. Nevertheless, he dug very deep holes and he amended it with biochar, and he put sleeves around each tree to protect it. And look at it 2 years later. This is, I think it's Dolph, who is my friend Francesca's partner. Well, they're both my friends. And these are the trees behind. You see, here are the trees behind. So here they are. But look at this. The silver beech have grown up here to be taller than he can reach, well taller. So by this technique, they grow incredibly fast. Now, the Miyawaki forest can deliver the benefits of nature. Just a sec. I want to unshare my screen and just share it back and forth. How do I unshare it? It's not giving me the option to unshare it. Forgive me while I learn to use this Zoom technology. Zoom.
I think if you take your mouse up to the top of your screen, you should see a green bar, and then to the right of that.
Screen. Thank you. Stop share.
Got it.
Good, because I don't want to obliterate all of each other. So here we are again, and I'll be sharing again quite soon. So with the experience that I've seen so far with the Miyawaki forests I've shown you, I'm convinced that they can deliver the benefits of nature to the people who need it most, which is particularly low-income people living in deprived suburbs. Now, I found that in my forests and bird forest restoration, almost all of the people are retired. Occasionally we can get school children, but particularly when he runs them in off-school hours. And Gary James, who does this, often does work in off-school hours to get a wider range of people. But mostly it's retired folk and reasonably fit retired folk. To me, the important thing to do is to have forest restoration available to a much wider range of people who are particularly low-income people who can't afford the time, and many of whom don't have access to a car. So city forests are a completely different theory from standard forest restoration. Standard restoration puts about 1/6 as many trees, and they dig holes and plant them in grass. And I will show you some examples in just a minute. So I can see tiny forests delivered for particular purposes. I'm going to share again, and I'm going to share PowerPoint. So the first purpose is education. Now, Francesca and Dolph, who are Dutch speaking, went to the Netherlands a year ago and did an inspection of about 4 or 5 tiny forests. This is one near Rotterdam. And this was 2 years and 5 months old. You see how tall the trees already are? And they are typically surrounded by a picket fence like this, which I'll talk about later. And this, I've put in a reference to the Dutch document that talks about exactly how to do their particular tiny forest. So this is one example. And the methodology, let's see, so that's the Nelson one. This is the Dutch one. This is one of the methods of preparing the tiny forests. The Dutch invariably use an actual ditch digger and dig out a full 200 odd square meters of ground, and they put a pile of straw, wood shavings, nut husks, whatever things they can find, and compost. Dump it in, use the digger to mix that up, and then spread the other half of it over and mix it all up to prepare the planting ground. Now, this is a different purpose from the education. So the benefits of tiny forests, which you want to advertise to your local authorities, include education, ecosystem services, that is to absorb stormwater, cool and clean the air, mitigate flood, fire, far better than trees and tree pits. And I've seen a lot written recently about sponge cities. Now, the third I have listed is rescue forests. And I want to talk about this photo, which is from our Waiau Swamp restoration. Do you see up here? This damn thing is, here it is. You see how this is the hillside above the Waiau Swamp. The Wainuiomata Hill goes up here between our ground, which is down here, Wainuiomata Hill, and here is the hillside that goes down from Lowry Trig down to Wainuiomata. Look at the holes in the, so you can see sky through the beech trees. And this is even worse. The beech trees seem to be suppressed. And look, you can see right through them from way down on the flat. So one of our restoration areas shows deer and rabbit damage. This here is a 5-finger, quite a good sized sapling, bitten off, simply bitten off. And here is the leaf that had been bitten off. Here is a narrow-leaved mahoe wow. This, by the way, is a cardboard cylinder. You can see the bamboo pieces around it. So the cylinder is propped up, and down here are the only leaves you can see. And up here is some of the mahoe completely bitten off. Here is a lemonwood planted, and you see every single tip has been bitten off. And yet lemonwoods are not known to be particularly partial to deer. So we have wire, this year we put wire cages around everything. And this is just so labor intensive. So we're back to each other. And so city forests can be basically rescue forests. We collect trees and shrubs and even herbaceous plants, as many as possible species, perhaps up to 60 species, planted in small plots like shown in Lebanon, and where there are no deer and hopefully no rabbits. So I think the rescue function is most important. And finally, supporting physical and mental health, because in the past decade, medical research has proven that contact with highly diverse microbes in the first 1,000 days since conception will train the body's immune system to suppress autoimmune diseases for the rest of life. This is such an important function. Now, you can question me on other city forest types. The Netherlands tiny forest for education is one of the easiest to fully reproduce. And we hope to build one in Wainuiomata. But you can also build a production forest. And in fact, the owners of the Manor Park Golf Club have offered an area that we can build a production forest. Same structure, 3 per square meter, and close packed into prepared soil. But a production forest, one could start harvesting poles in my view, 3 or 4 years, and gradually expose the bigger trees. And maybe in 50 years, you have big rimu trees, which you could grow on for 300 years. So I've talked about this concept with Wainuiomata. And energy forests and a food forest is another important kind of city forest. That will not be done close packed, but I have some nice photos of the Riverton food forest if you're interested. Later on, we'll open those out during questions. Shady streets is another idea of mine, that if you have 2 meter wide along the berm near a footpath, you could put a close packed forest, which again would be fully biodiverse, bring all the insects and all the soil microorganisms, and would handle the rain and things particularly well. Now I will unshare this. Where is my sharing? I've lost my sharing app. It's supposed to be up here on the top. Where can I stop share? It's not, my stop share app isn't up at the top anymore.
Molly, we're not seeing your screens anymore.
Okay, yeah.
This is Mandy, by the way, who keeps butting in with a bit of technology.
Okay, good. So indigenous, so collaborating with your local marae, I think is by far the most interesting and likely to be successful way to get city forests, active city forests, whether large or small, into your community. Indigenous peoples worldwide survived by living with nature and accepting the reciprocal obligation to care for her. They utilized her resources over timescales that dwarf the planning horizons of today's governments. The Wainuiomata marae is planning to build an educational ngaihiri korowai that is a feather cloak of a forest on their own grounds, alongside a forest and playground, which will tell the stories of their ancestors and of the importance of treating nature with respect, of asking permission before harvest, and accepting the reciprocal obligation to care and protect. Now I'm going to try to share the screen again because I want to show you what their primary educator has offered to us. They say trees are so important. They teach you to care for nature and to protect. Tane Mahuti warns to remember the importance of asking permission before taking from the forests. The Purakau of Rata cuts a tree without permission, symbolizes the dangers of taking without considering humankind's impact and the overall destruction of our environment, and ultimately our collective home, symbolized by the moko kawai at the center of the tree. The roots go deep into the ground. And this is before I did too much to tell them about the Miyawaki Method. So the roots deep into the ground. Overall, this represents the concept of the home tree or the mother tree. And later on, when I talked with them, I put this into the hands of the elders. Braiding sweetgrass for young adults is by far the most helpful of Robin Wall Kimmerer's 2 books. And she explains how she experienced the world as a gift economy and how different it is from the market economy. Now, that is, I will unshare if I can, stop share. So, when you consider the value of putting these Miyawaki forests in the poorest suburbs, this will allow you to build forests as part of a kohanga reo. And I think of that school forest in Lebanon, a mere 30 square meters, containing, I think, 17 species. And you can teach kids as the forest grows up, you can teach them to identify and even sing songs about the trees. And the Sydney Milburn songs are a wonderful example of playing with forests and all their species. So I think kohanga reo are the ideal place to do this. Now I'll go very quickly about planning, maintenance, and costs. City planners have no conception of a forest within their city boundaries. Their streets and footpaths are enhanced, if at all, with street trees and tree pits. A strong culture of colonization underlines all of our planning traditions, based on what has been called the imperial lawn, which used to demonstrate the wealth of the gentry and became part of the order that colonists imposed on the conquered land. Grass is their default vegetation cover, and the ride-on mowers actually emit more carbon than the grass sequesters. I find that simplistic concepts underlie the recent resource management legislation. Urban intensification is replacing backyard gardens with sausage flats. Now, once more, I'm trying to share screen. Here we go. I think I think that will do it. Now I want to share PowerPoint. Share. Because here is urban intensification in Holland, where the educational forest that I showed you with the poles and with Dolph about to open the gate. If you turn 180 degrees, look what you see, a 22-story flat. So by building tall instead of wide, I think it's entirely possible to fit a tiny forest in a city. That's to be later. I think I have, I want to show you this. So the Miyawaki Method is, here's another high rise, which was set off by a 2-meter wide, surrounded by a 2-meter wide Miyawaki forest. And the broadleaf trees had so much moisture in them that they prevented the fire from reaching the nearby flats. No, what else? That's damage. So here is where in Japan a tsunami completely wiped out things, but the shrine forest, here's a shrine behind it, was essentially undamaged. So they speak of disaster preventative forests, which prevent objects from being washed away by the undertow of a tsunami. And there are many of these now that line the eastern coast of Japan. See if there's any other. Oh, there's one more I want to show you. This was only to say that you do, for a big tiny forest like in the Netherlands, you need a big ditch digger. I'm not convinced that we cannot teach some of the youth to drive a mini ditch digger to build a very small, let's say a 30 square meter tiny forest in Wainuiomata, and to extend it year after year. In 1 or 2 years, I have to turn that off. So the costs can be replaced to an extent by voluntary labor, particularly using the gift economy of nature. I've discussed this at some length in the paper, which I can make available afterwards. But I just want to go very quickly for a call. And to finish, I want to show you, come on, and I want to show you, here's one in Queensland, and this is only 3 years after it was planted, and it was planted into a grassy strip. If you think that it takes tropical Queensland to do that, here's Washington State, the most northwestern state in the main part of the United States, 400 square meters, 1,400 trees. Here's the site. Here it is 3 years after planting. And this is being planted under the watchful eye and planning of indigenous Northwest American Indians. And look at how high, even in the northernmost part of the contiguous US, look at how fast the trees grow. So I want to speak as I'll stop share now. I want to encourage analyses of so-called economics to base it on biophysics, not on economic concepts. Biophysics counts everything. Degrowth greens I've been following and trying to participate in, but even the greens, the parliamentary greens, are very dependent on economics, as are the climate change international conferences. I think School Strike for Climate is a more hopeful way to get new concepts based on biophysics. And I do support the new group, Tapatahi, the Coalition for a People's Aotearoa. Now for an epilogue, I say, during the Carboniferous Era, trees turned a hothouse Earth into an ice age in just a few 100 million years. That created the coal deposits that sparked the Industrial Revolution. Trees could now introduce vibrant, healthy, resource-rich ecosystems into today's cities and suburbs. We paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Let's put paradise back there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Molly. That song was a long time ago, but it's even more relevant, isn't it?
It's even more relevant now.
Yeah. Molly, we've had a request for the Riverton food forest
Oh, yes.
photo. Do you
I have two
those?
slides on that, of course. I'll share again. Share screen. I knew there was some that I had. Come on. I've said to share screen. Where the hell is it? I want this. Here it is. Now I'll go here. So here are two photos of Riverton. No, they're way down here. So here is the Riverton food forest, including just where it is, which is, that's the inlet of a big river that goes into Riverton and the hills behind. And these are about 20, 25 years old, is that right? And here is the more open part with the big trees behind, and the food forest is just in amongst. So those are just two photos I took of it. I think I got these from a video. So that's the Riverton food forest, which is one of the other ways of putting small forests. These are not Miyawaki forests, but forests designed to forage for food right where you're living. Robert, yes. Hi.
Thank you. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions on, there are so many aspects of Molly's talk.
Yeah, kia ora, thanks, Molly. My name's Amanda, I'm from Rotorua. Just wondered if any New Zealand ecologists have looked at this technique in terms of its appropriateness for New Zealand plant species, just being aware of, you know, the naturally slow growing property of a lot of our trees.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, I believe the short answer is there is the Waikato University has a program they call People, Cities, and Nature. And I spoke with their organizer at the Otatongahiri conference, and I was keen to keep in touch with them. But when I emailed her after Christmas, she said they have a very narrow area of studies that they do if they are funded. I think they entirely dependent on where the funding goes and exactly what the funding is expecting to cover. So their short answer is that they couldn't help me in investigating tiny forests. You'll see that I have in the poster, which I will give you a link to, that I put up at the Tautauangahere conference. What about that poster? No, I can't remember. There's something that I actually referred to in the poster, but the short answer is that universities are so narrowly focused on what gets funded that they have not been able to. In that poster, I specifically suggested that the people be that professionally they examine the amount of carbon sequestration and the amount of biodiversity and even the amount of carbon in the soil. But the People, Cities, and Nature couldn't do it because they're too narrowly funded.
I can just make a brief comment there, kia ora, Amanda, that the tiny forest in Wakatu Nelson that I've seen was all natives, and they seem to be doing extremely well. So it seems as though the theory applies here as well, but obviously research would be good.
Can I
Colin,
speak to that, please?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Colin. Ours is the forest in Whakatu, which was planted by the Nelson Muslim Association. So we had a whole team of Muslims putting up the forest, and we took a list of species from Nelson City Council who publish heritage planting around Nelson. So all the traditional trees and bushes, they list them in different geographical areas. And we took their list and took them to a native tree nursery. And as Molly said, who's been there, they're really thriving. And they're now 2.25 years old, and the forest is doing very, very well.
But let me point out that you have said on your website that the grass is still a pain. Do you remember when I was there and I brought my border fork and I spent almost 10 minutes completely removing the grass away from a cabbage tree? It took
Miyawaki allows for that. Miyawaki says for 3 years, you are allowed to weed and water.
That's right.
But after 3 years, you leave the forest to itself. Yeah.
But if you had been able to completely dig out all the grass and replace it by a fully amended soil, you would have had less grass. I find that grass is very inhibiting to native trees.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much, Colin. It's a wonderful initiative and
It
very
was.
gratifying to see it there. Any other questions? Please just ask away.
Oh, it's Pam here from Transition Towns. Now, I've been working alongside Molly with the Wainui o Mata wonderful project there, but I worked with Philip Simpson at DOC for a number of years, and Philip is still one of our leading ecologists, and his view was that we've gone the wrong way with planting of single specimen trees, and millions of dollars have been invested by local authorities in doing this. And he talked about the importance of essential ecological processes. And when you bring back species that are part of a natural forest association, even in miniature, those ecological processes like pollination and seed dispersal will actually start to happen. And so the forest becomes self-sustaining and self-managing. And Molly, you've done a lot of investigation about that happening under the ground with the
That's
soil
right.
microorganisms. So what you see, there's an amazing sort of life going on under the ground with interlocking, you know. And the other main thing that Philip said is the main thing we need to do, really. We spend enormous amounts of money trying to restore. The first thing is to exclude your browsing mammals, and that, you know, can often happen in an urban environment. We know from DOC that many of our more endangered indigenous species are doing quite well, you know, by being planted in sort of unlikely places, like, you know, on the edge of a road, where they're not actually being attacked by animals that want to come along and eat them. So yeah, I just think it's kickstarting nature's processes. And Molly, I'm wondering, you might be able to answer this, or somebody might, if we do have tiny forests, do they kind of, because birds are going to take the seeds over time, do we have others, you know, what happens? It's not going to stay within the size of a tennis court forever, is it? I mean, it might, but presumably there'll be seedlings coming up in other parts of the nearby.
Well,
won't there?
the Dutch have found that the tiny forests do attract the native birds.
Yeah.
And they will definitely spread the seeds. Those forests in Queensland, some of them were built specifically to make corridors where
Right.
certain birds can reach and access other areas. That first one that I showed you, remember, I finished off with a picture of enormously tall forest, 3.5 years old, trunks this big, and somebody standing there. That was a mere 100 square meters planted in grass as part of a project to bring the cassowary back and extend its range. So that's one of the real purposes of Miyawaki forests, is to extend the range of species that are being squeezed.
Well, and I think, you know, for all of us, we're going to get buy-in from agencies like councils and Department of Conservation if we embrace that forest corridor concept.
That's
In
right.
the hut, for example, you know, we're wanting to get corridors so that we can get our birds and our insects moving, you know, down from the Belmont Hills across into Eastbourne. And I'd never thought of this before. That's brilliant, that they could form part of the whole sort of corridor concept with these patchwork forests.
Yep.
Connecting to bigger forest stands. Yeah, for
Can
insects.
I come in
Yeah.
here also? I'm Francesca, and I also went to Holland and interviewed Dan Blechthoort, who started up all the tiny forests in Holland, and it has now been adapted by UNESCO to go across Europe. And they used Wassenaar University to do some research, and they specifically were also interested in a number of things, but one of them was insects, because insect counts are going down. And they did find that the insects numbers go up, not necessarily in range. You won't necessarily get a biodiverse range of insects, but biodiversity is also important in terms of numbers of insects. and that birds in some places are falling out of the sky because they, like the swifts, because they're not having enough food. So having them going into the cities, it also helps from the perspective of that. And the other really important thing they said was that it brought down the heat. Like the pavements can be like 26 degrees, but under the trees it'll be 9. So with the increasing heat that's also happening in Europe and in other parts of the world, it can also have a cooling effect and conserve water. And so there are really a lot of benefits to a tiny forest in urban areas. And the last thing I wanted to say was that Molly didn't emphasize is that Miyawaki really says that you need to get all the 3 levels of the forest planted at the same time. And so that means the understory, the middle, and the top story. And that also helps again with that biodiversity that the other lady just talked about, you know, that you can't, that the monoculture is really bad. And he said that you should have at least 30 species and they should belong to your own ecological area, as Colin Davis emphasized. So yeah, there's quite a lot to the method. It's simple, but it has got a lot of quite important ideas in it. Thanks.
Thank you, Francesca and Pam. Yes, please ask.
Could I just ask Molly a practical question? This has been a very inspiring webinar. Molly, when you've got councils who object to planting on berms because people then complain they can't see when they drive out of their properties, how do you overcome this? I mean, do you just put small stuff there, or is there some other way of getting a decent forest going on these berms?
This is sure to be the most difficult job of getting tiny forests. When I first described it in a meeting in Wellington, somebody said, we don't want anything like that. Bad people will hide in the forest and jump out at people and disturb children. Now, my answer to the bad people is that if you put that picket fence around a tiny forest, and you can make it much denser than is shown, you can even double up or triple up, and I've got some ideas on that. People, it would be too hard to push through that fence and jump out and attack children. Now, what did you ask, Viola, about the other?
I was asking about people driving out of their drives and complaining they can't see when there's a forest on the berm.
That's one I haven't thought about. The only thing I can think is that, I mean, you can teach people to use mirrors and to back out very carefully until your mirror shows what's on the road. That's the only answer I can actually give.
Can I interrupt here about this very subject? It's Bev speaking. I live in Auckland and I've planted a low forest on my berm, whether the council like it or not, and they haven't complained.
I love it.
I have specifically put miniature flax, miniature toitoi, hebe, and native grasses.
Yep.
And now my neighbours are starting to copy, and it's been very successful. There are some, it's experimental. Some things, you know, die and you have to replace them with something that will do better, but it's been a lot of fun and it looks absolutely wonderful.
Well,
and it's no trouble for my neighbours coming out of their gateways because nothing's high enough.
Yep.
But you have to look for the miniature ones.
So there are swamp forests you can find things that are low enough so that you can overcome that problem. And in that case, you want your tiny forests to be not right along the road, but, you know, but in slightly different areas. our forest and bird group has been approached by the Manor Park golf course, who said, look, we've got this corner of the golf course that's really doing nothing valuable. Put a forest there, we'd love to have it. So there are many places in the city, but you'll have complaints about backing out. You'll have complaints about bad people jumping out at people. You'll have complaints about shading. Every complaint will have to be dealt with appropriately. But above all, you want your plantings in the city to be in real soil with a multiple of species. So you have the biodiversity, the insects, the birds. There are many ways to skin a cat.
Molly, if I can jump in there on the unsafe aspect, you had asked that question before, and I asked that question for you, remember, with Dan Blijgaard, and he said that the fear was bigger than the reality, that their experience of that happening is really very low. And I think there is now about 500 or more tiny forests across the Netherlands. So I think it's, again, people say these things, but in reality, it is. He says some stuff happens. There's been a bit of vandalism here and there, but he said it's not been a major problem.
Well, that is so important to know. Go on.
Oh, sorry, I've had my hand up for a while. So.
Yes, sorry, we've got a couple of hands up there. Perhaps, Amanda, we've got Kay Mercer, I've seen there. If she could ask her question, and then you come back in, Amanda. I just can't see.
Yeah. It was more of a comment really about booms, and I worked with Hamilton City Council looking at that issue, and the feedback from them was that they have a lot of services that go through the booms, so things like water and power and stuff like that. So if you did plant on a boom, you had to be prepared to have your tree ripped out if they needed to access those services. So I agree with what Molly was saying, that it's actually better to look for other places, particularly if you're planting long-lived species. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, Dan Blijgaard confirmed what you were saying there, that the place when they had gone across surfaces had got ripped out, and that you do have to check for that, otherwise all your labor goes to waste.
Thank you. And Amanda.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Molly, there's actually been a lot of research done on the relationship between crime and urban vegetation, and it's actually the other way around. There's quite strong evidence that it actually reduces the incidence of crime. So it's quite a common perception, but the evidence is quite persuasive that it's actually the other way around. So there are quite a few studies out there that give the lie to that particular perception.
Well, that, Amanda, is very important. And if you can perhaps contact Climate Declaration and
yep, I can do that. I can send some references.
Some of those references. Any of you people who have references which support or also which oppose some of the ideas, I was hoping this webinar would create a much bigger list of information, both experience and references, so that we could back up what we just assert with many, many people's experience. Thank you, Amanda.
Right. Anyone else with a question or a comment? Yes. Go ahead there, Pam.
When I was in Joke, I did a lot of research about the benefits for children of connecting with nature or not. And one of the greatest risks to our children today in urban areas is summed up in a wonderful book by Richard Louv, L-O-U-V, called Last Child in the Woods. It's called Nature Deficit Disorder. And I would say that children living in the kinds of medium to high density housing intensification that we're looking at across this country, we're going to be running into problems because children really must grow up, and young people, with a kind of local neighbourhood nature. Many of these families can't and won't afford to go to more remote dock reserves. Very important that we bring that back to towns. And I'll just show you a very inspiring book if you can see it. Before and after, can you see that? Before and after. It's a beautiful book called Belonging. And there's the after picture, the same view from a different window. Can you see that? So we're really kind of needing to embrace a better understanding of why we must have, you know, young people and kids and families connecting with nature. And I've got tons of references, Molly, if you need them.
That's wonderful.
But probably the main one for any of you interested in this subject is to read Last Child in the Woods. I'll put it into the chat, by Richard Louv. I'll just write that into the chat now. Thank you.
Could we ask that everybody check, and in the first instance, everybody mute, and then that's only because there is some very serious interference happening on the microphone.
Thank you.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
good. Much better. Let's have some more questions, please.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? I can't see everyone all the time, so please call out.
By the
Whoops,
way,
and
the interference is back. That's better.
Julian, did you have something?
Yeah. Kia ora tātou. Hello, Robin. Hello, Molly.
Hi.
Sorry for the typing. I hadn't realized I turned my mic on. I was checking it. Anyway, look, Molly, thank you for the chat and introducing the concept of this tiny forest. Is fascinating. One of the most interesting things I caught part of what you're saying about was about a forest, a fire that had happened somewhere in Japan. And how the trees had helped protect a temple or something nearby there because they were so full of moisture. Can you tell us more about that? Do you know any more details about that? Yep. Whereabouts was that and when?
That was on
If I wanted
the
to
east coast of Japan, and it was a great tsunami and earthquake, and I think it was 2011. There's one more reference I forgot to put in the chat, which I will just add to the chat, and it was the Merino project. If you just Google Merino project, you'll find a 6-page document which talks about and the disaster forest, the forest that was in front of a big block of flats, came from that same document. So this is in Japan, which is where Miyawaki started the whole thing.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. I'll look that up. Thanks very much.
Good.
Colin, do you have another question or comment? Please unmute. Thank you.
Yeah, do you mind if I come back in? It's just that when we set up our forest, we had no idea what we were doing. We were complete ignoramuses, and this was 3 years ago. And we asked around people who were in the know about forestry, and we came across Dr. Murray McClintock in Nelson, who said, look at biochar. So I want to recommend biochar because I looked up biochar in Google, and basically it was used by the Amazonian Indians to help fertilize in a totally natural way their vegetable beds, because forest soil is not very fertile on the whole. So we found out from America how to make biochar ourselves, and we built 4 little furnaces, which we filled with dry wood, and we made the biochar, and we made 1,000 kilos of it, which we buried under where the forest was going to be. We dug 200 holes and buried the biochar along with compost, along with liquid manure, along with water, and covered it up and let it brew. And that's what really has made our forest bloom, we think, anyway.
I agree.
So please try it, some of you. I'm very willing to tell people how to make biochar, because it's fantastic stuff.
Thank you indeed, Colin. That's very, very relevant. And I think there is also a company in New Zealand making biochar, although I guess ideally we would make it in each locality with the waste wood that's around us. So, right, anyone else got a comment, a question, something to add?
Lala Fraser has somebody down there.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that most organic groups are making biochar in different places. But Molly, the thing that I'm really interested in is that what you're effectively doing with these forests is you are increasing the fertility of the soil in the same way as we would normally do with our vegetable gardens, and then planting very close together. And I'm just interested whether it's very similar to our natural revegetation, where you get a lot of seedlings very close together, but then of course they fight for the light. And you lose some of them. And even though, say, you're planting for 3 different levels, it'd be interesting to know whether you do lose some of those species over time.
If you, I've put in the chat all but one of the references, and the reference I forgot to put in was the Merino project. But the Suji project, a lot of my photos came that I screen shared. And this was 142 tiny forests in 19 countries. And every one of them used the method of 3 trees per square meter. Now, I should add the reference. Miyawaki himself wrote a paper in an ecological journal in 1999, in which he talked about how he came to devise this method. And he pointed out that the forests do not try to be natural. They are not following ordinary forest succession, in which it takes 200 or more years to reach anything like a natural forest. These are artificial forests. They're forests in which the trees have been forced to grow up, therefore taking a very unnatural form, but they turn out to be incredibly stable. And they're stable to earthquake and fire and this and that, but they're not natural. They're long and skinny, but they do produce flowers and fruit, so that as a rescue forest, you could put a tiny forest right in the city. And after however many years, you could start collecting seeds and or cuttings. And you could then use those. And indeed, I believe it's a really good idea to associate a small nursery alongside a tiny forest. And then you can collect the seeds from your special, precious species that have been eaten out. And that's why I put the photo of the bush line that you see from Waiu, which is eaten out by deer and possums and pigs also. So many of the species have been lost, but even these tall, skinny trees will flower and fruit. You can collect from them. They're not natural, but by God, do they put on the biomass fast.
Interesting.
And that's why I wanted to see universities studying them, count up the weight of the biomass. But the universities are constrained by their funding to do very narrow investigations.
I know a couple of plant biologists at Lincoln University, so I'll contact them and see if there might be a way they can wangle it into some funded project.
What a good idea.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I had a person from NMIT, Nelson, the institute from the plant department, and they are going to explore the forest and hopefully create some of their own.
Oh, very good.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you, Colin, and having your wonderful example, I'm sure will inspire them and all of us for that matter. Right.
Well, another question or idea anyway. I'm not, let me phrase this way. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I know I'm mumbling at the moment. Okay, all right, thank you. Is there anything like a New Zealand organization or network of people who grow urban forests? There seems to be a wealth of experience and insight and information amongst the people who are here to learn about this particular style. It would be great to see or to know that there is a network of folks from whom people could contact and get more advice and information in the future going forward. Does anyone know if such an organization exists? Or
I believe there is not one. Colin, do you know of one?
No, I don't. That's been our problem, that we haven't had inputs from anywhere in New Zealand, but we've had a lot of contacts with people who want to go away and do it themselves.
So I have a short paper called Seeking People to Support the Formation of a City Forest Charitable Trust. And I could post that on the OCD website if you're interested. At 84 years old, I do not want to be the driver of a city forest charitable trust.
Fair enough, Molly.
I do believe that there is room for one.
But it doesn't show very well.
Joanna, have you got a comment there? Joanna or Jack?
I just wanted a moment to acknowledge Robert Guyton, who's part of this meeting, for his work on food forests in Riverton. He really has shown lots of us what can be done in terms of that kind of forest. And yeah, just a mihi to you, Robert.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
It certainly sounds like a
Can
a
can
great
can
idea.
I jump in for a minute? Sorry,
Yes.
Francesca. There is a company called A Forest in India with and that's the man who was in connection with Miyawaki. I've forgotten his name for a minute. Shubiri, I think Shubari. And he has developed a lot of information about how to do them right across the world. He works with people in India, in Africa, and you can go onto his website and there's a lot of information, and he will share information also. And he's streamlined, being an engineer originally, how to go about it. And he has very systematic knowledge about, about building a Miyawaki forest. So he is a source of information that we shouldn't ignore.
Thank you, Francesca. Was that A Forest?
A Forest, A and then Forest, I believe. I'd have to look it up exactly. I'd find it quite quickly. Shibiri, I could pass it on. I'll just have a look in Google if I can find it, but I have looked it up in the past, and he also comes to countries to advise. I mean, the one in Holland, when they started it seriously, he came over and he helped with the first forest in the Netherlands. And he also got the workers to come to a desert in India, and they turned the desert in 3 years into forest, parts of the desert. So, and so he has experience in a lot of different settings. And I think that's important. And he's also interested, of course, in places where people experiment with it. Shibari, A Forest. Have you heard of him, Molly?
Oh, yes, yes.
I have passed on the info to you before.
Yeah, in fact, he informed the original Netherlands tiny forests.
Yes.
And I've taken quite a bit of information from his website, A Forest. But I do find that the Suji group, which is just another one doing very much like the A Forest people, the Suji people have published an annual report 2022, which has been the source of quite a few of the photographs that I've shared, because it's a massive 270-page document with statistics and photos of each of those 142 forests. So for a survey in many, many countries. So for a survey of what the technique does, it's an outstanding publication. And every one of them has approximately three or four trees per square meter. That's the underlying rule that is always used.
Thank you. Molly, do you spell that S-U-J-I or?
S-U-G-I.
G-I.
If you Google Suji 2022, you'll probably find it. But if you copy the chat before we close down, that is one of the 6 or 7 references that has been most used in the screenshots that I've shared.
Thank you.
Just copy the whole chat and you'll find it.
Thank you. Just wondering, Julian, if you would like to introduce your post.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I value the opportunity to listen to you guys today, and I hear that a lot of you have had your own experiences of different forms of urban forest generation. And I'm just starting to get into this sort of thing myself. I've done some tree rescue with conservation volunteers around Porniki here, Wellington area, and really enjoyed it. Yeah, I just, if nothing like this exists yet, then it's dead easy just to kick it off now and get it going, and I'd love to see that. So anyone who wants to put their name to that, it's an open document. It's like a Word document, but anyone can click on the link and enter their details. So
so can we ask our climate declaration to publish Julian's paper? And I have about 3 pages, which are the notes for this talk, to publish those 2 things. And I will add my own thoughts on a city forest charitable trust. And Julian, where do you live, Julian?
Kingston, up the hill from Newtown, really, to
Right.
the west of Newtown and Wellington.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody in our region would be it to lead this charitable trust, and that would help us put specific proposals to Wainuiomata, who really is too busy they need a specific proposal to go ahead with their Ngāhiri Korowai, their precious cloak forest. And maybe one of you people will write that proposal. So let's correspond through climate declaration, okay?
Sounds great. Awesome.
Great.
Sounds good.
Fantastic.
And hopefully when the webinar is posted on our climate declaration website, we can include those links and references and so forth. So, right, any last comments, questions?
Now I want to copy this whole chat. Who knows how to copy? I think I can.
Right. I think I've asked Jack to do that.
Excellent.
Molly, but if anyone else knows how to do it, please do so. I don't think I've quite got that one yet.
Yep. So Jack, if you could email me a document with all the chat, I would value it. Thank you.
I've just found how you do it, so that's good. Well, thank you very much, Molly, for a wealth of information about these wonderful forests, and thank you to all the participants for adding your thoughts and knowledge and asking such interesting questions.
That's right.
So I think we will please refer to the link to the webinar on our climate declaration and these other links and ways of staying in touch. And we'll look forward to seeing more of them around our beautiful Aotearoa, or soon to be more beautiful, shall we say.
And thank you, Robin,
Thank
you, Robin, for controlling us so well.
No problem. Shall I pass on that comment about you and Jeanette?
Go ahead.
I attended the Green Party provincial meeting at the weekend for West Coast Tasman, Marlborough, and Gareth Hughes gave a very interesting presentation and asked at one point if anyone knew Molly. So I put my hand up and had a brief chat with him afterwards, where he passed on a very interesting little snippet of information that Jeanette Fitzsimons and Molly were given the term the two tarts by the electricity hierarchy. I think because they were stirrers.
Yeah.
That right?
That was nice from Gareth.
Yes. So well earned, I'm sure, and much appreciated by the rest of us there. All right. Good night all. Thank you.